Hello, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody. Kushti, you're joining us from the F1 Formula One speed track, huh? You doing some time trials for Subblocks?
Yeah, it's more like traffic jam, but yeah, well, a lot of news for talking about Subblocks, all that stuff.
And we've got Joe today.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah, finally. So maybe it's worth to make it a bit later. But yeah, well, I have to pick up my child here around this time. But yeah, maybe not next week. Let's see. And we can experiment with formats, right? So we may have another Twitter Spaces this month and so on.
Yeah, I think
community call.
CKB was interested in doing another space as well yesterday in chat. So I think we've got support for that. Sounds great.
Yeah, and there are more parties. There is also some merged mind Bitcoin sidechain with active community, especially in Brazil, and they are interested in having spaces also. So yeah, maybe in December or January. Let's see. So how about you guys? How are you doing?
Busy. A lot cooking, at least with the Rosen team at the moment. What's the latest on the core updates? I know that you're limited with time today, Kushti, so why don't we kind of blast through what you want to cover, and then we'll kind of...
All right, so yeah, well, for 6.0, well, we just have now 2 small PRs not merged, so well, the final release candidate will be out in like a few days, so maybe tomorrow or on Monday, depending on testing. And with that, we can proceed with public testnet activation, right, and testing, and then yeah, mainnet voting. And with that, you know, well, usually I'm working like one feature is worked on now, and then yeah, well, I'm planning another one, right, and well, dreaming about well, the step after next, and so yeah, well, now jumping again on well, Subblocks, so well, completing KEP and well, finishing somewhat prototyping code, which is already half done in regards with internal miner and yeah, some processing steps and so on. And so yeah, well, and as a step after next, so well, let's think, so what's needed for the real world adoption, so whether it's about layer 2s or sidechains, right? So what could be the post Subblocks topic? It's an open question, and yeah, depends on demand, right? So well, developers adjust sort of demand coming from the real world. I believe that's how it should be. So yeah, a lot of things. Do you hear me, guys?
Yeah, I hear you.
I'm just letting it soak in, Kushti, that's all.
And do you hear advices I'm getting from Navigator, by the way? No?
Do I hear what?
So sometimes I'm getting hints about which direction to take. So.
Oh no, I don't hear that.
Oh, no, we don't hear you.
All right, good, yeah. Because yeah, I hear it, and yes, sometimes yeah, that's causing pause on my side actually. And so what about you guys? And yeah, then a lot of talks we have recently in the developers community and Ergo Devs DAO. So yeah, well, there is demand for new tutorials, for example, and yeah, well, a lot of good talk. So well, please jump on if you're interested in development wise matters. So developments related. So, how about you guys? What's new?
Well, on the Rosen
what-
side, yeah, we can dive into the Rosen side. So we have like multiple layers right now that are being worked on. We recently pushed an upgraded testnet called Pandora. We're working on testing a new peer-to-peer layer underneath the guard set, which should help with kind of the throughput and internal communication, beneath the Rosen network. In parallel, we're working on integrating Dogecoin. One kind of unique thing that we did with that integration is we actually farmed it out, right? And a part of that, I guess part of that process is to actually improve the onboarding documentation for chains that, want to join the Rosen network, but, may not be like positioned to where they're a priority. That was one thing that we really appreciated when we were looking into bridge frameworks. Initially with Ergo was, you had multiple different, let's say bridge frameworks at the time. And kind of in digging through the assumption, there was a pretty big spread in terms of like external support and onboarding documentation. Like how do we as an external chain kind of build into this system? And so part of my, let's say, hope with Rosen is we get documentation down to where we make that as seamless as possible for smaller chains to join, right? I think that barrier of entry becomes pretty important, because the team has to always like prioritize, okay, well, we're going to bridge to a new, chain. What's like the incentive? What's the market? And that, sometimes will cause us to kind of be forced to skip smaller projects, right? So if we can create a mechanism with, proper documentation, and kind of like a clear path to joining Rosen, I think that is a nice incentive for, teams out there that have the mind share, but perhaps not the capital that's attractive. In parallel, we're working with Binance Smart Chain. And a part of that process is adapting to different cost factors in EVM, right? And that will be like one of the unique hurdles for every EVM environment is how, gas functions, what's the cost of transactions, and how can we kind of create tooling and mind share to where that becomes something that will replicate a lot, right? EVM compatibility is pretty well adopted. So it's like, okay, well, if we're going to go into Binance Smart Chain, if we're going to go into base layer 2, if we're going to go into Ink, if we're going to go into, Optimism or all of these different layer 2 environments, there are kind of tweaks to EVM and cost parameters, right? So having a pretty solid foundation to be able to replicate that and adapt will help us accelerate as we kind of scale into new environments. And so being that this is the first like non-ETH EVM, we're kind of digging into that a bit, which I believe will help adaptability in the future. Now, on top of that, we posted the proposal that was submitted to the Hummingbot Foundation. So that's connected to the Ergo blockchain, and that creates some kind of unique unification of markets, right? It's a potential that to me has always been maybe even more important than the bridge itself. It's important to understand, like, you can connect, to blockchains, right? And that's great. You kind of can send assets back and forth, but your experience becomes fragmented, right? And so having trade bots on top that can, interact with both environments pretty much in sync, kind of reunifies liquidity. Now, one of the reasons we chose that tool is because first and foremost, it's open source. It's been around since like 2018, 2019. There are connectors to multiple central exchanges, which are, sometimes used by traders, sometimes used by market makers. You do get into some KYC friction if you're going to be, you running bots through exchange APIs. But one unique thing that Rosen will do is unify kind of a non-KYC bot environment, which has some nice properties for liquidity providers. So in parallel, we were talking with the Spectrum Splash team, and we actually farmed out the same development team that we worked with in the Hummingbot integration for Ergo. And so they're in the process of testing. They're actually pretty far along in their implementation. So that will give us, a point of unity across Cardano and Ergo and Ethereum and, Binance Smart Chain and multiple centralized exchange environments. And that just makes arbitrage more frictionless, right? Which is an important aspect of Rosen. When prices slip, there's always a profit opportunity that people can then trade and, potentially arbitrage and then rebalance liquidity over time. And the bridge acts as like an underlying piece of infrastructure to rebalance liquidity. But yeah, we're talking and exploring a lot of different tooling around Rosen itself, which is, pretty early and to probably talk about because then people will bother win. But even beyond like what's going on in parallel, we're trying to chart out a future. We are scoping the Bitcoin Runes integration still, looking at which service to kind of build off of in terms of interacting with the Bitcoin blockchain. And what else? Yeah, we have 2 Catalyst votes actually that are currently live. So one of them is a bridge to Solana. One of them is a bridge to Sui, I think they call it. So those of you that would like to see Rosen, expand into new environments, please vote. Those 2 are kind of their own unique beasts, right? So it takes more like custom integration and adaptation to the parameters and how the chain functions versus something like a Bitcoin fork or a EVM compatible environment. So we applied for a grant, threw that out there, supported some Cardano assets, added Ergo tokens finally, and hopefully projects out there are kind of in the process of going through integrations. Let's see where that goes. We can open doors, but then, it's ultimately up to projects and their community to scale across markets. Hopefully we can deliver like the infrastructure necessary to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think it was awesome, Joe, that you guys, you fast-tracked those Ergo projects that have been around for a while, like what was it, Bober, Ergo One, Greasy, GIF from Greasy Sex, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of things, if they get lost in the shuffle sometimes, right? Those kind of things you plan to do for the community that's been supporting you and being gung-ho about this. So I think it's great that you guys just went ahead, bombed it through and put 12 or 13 projects from Ergo and Cardano on the chain last week. And you already see there's a big liquidity pool on ETH for the GIF and some on Cardano. I think the others are starting to bridge as well. So it's fun seeing these projects creep out throughout the whole crypto ecosystems.
It was one of my largest frustrations in working with central exchanges actually is, I maybe 2-3 years ago, I went around and said, hey, you've integrated our node, right? You need a scanner to pick out this particular asset, and we can put like a documentation path that you can just replicate, right? So it's something that if you get a developer on that, it should, in essence, become less friction through time because experience helps. And let's try to create a flat pricing mechanism that is transparent and fair. That way, a project that is going to start has an idea what the cost to market is, And let's see if we can create a pipeline that gives them this ability to raise funds with some idea of what the market costs are. And essentially that is like this, I don't know, a weird thing about the crypto industry is like the non-disclosures and inability to forecast pricing. Like how do you run a business in that environment is somewhat insane, just from like a practical perspective. But yeah, that's something that never really went anywhere. And so then it's like, okay, well, if I look at the cost of listing, and let's just say $50,000, right, for a project to list on a mediocre exchange with shitty support, right? And let's be honest, I've worked with some of the, I was the American help desk when Kushti was asleep, right? For a while. It extracts so much value from communities. It's really insane to me. That it's like, okay, 50,000 is great for one project, but then when you're talking 10, it's $500,000 pulled out of an ecosystem. Like that's quite a chunk of money that could potentially bootstrap a lot of development. It could be useful, right? And
Yeah,
that's not.
and we are talking about very shitty exchanges, right? So
Yeah,
nobody is actually willing to use like P2P, B2B, I mean, all that crap. No one is actually using.
We're talking about exchanges where 80% of the time, I get like, hey, we're having some infrastructure problems. And it's like, well, what version of the node are you running? Oh, well, we haven't updated in, X, time. And it's like, well, maybe you should start there. And so looking at like the extraction capacity from communities versus like the service offered, it doesn't scale. There's no other way to put it. It doesn't scale well. And so a part of the like primary intent of Rosen initially is that we need to be able to support projects, not just coins. Right. And that is one, somewhat unique thing about Rosen's capacity is this ability to, take a project and spread it across different markets without rehypothecating assets. So I'm really happy to support the Ergo community. I hope they do great things. And, hopefully we can build the tooling on top to, manage liquidity and help, that process in terms of market adoption. No, the one thing that kind of is painful with Rosen's dynamic, right, is the harder aspect to scale is actually above chain, right? So we move into Ethereum and it's like, okay, well then, projects want to go to CoinGecko and that's its own process, and they want to get their logo and that's its own process, and they want to get on different aggregators and that's its own process. And like there's a lot of friction permission points that actually make like scaling above chain somewhat more painful, right? So, we've tried to gather documentation and put together like a onboarding portion that projects can read in the Ergo docs site. And I think that's always important to have like some open source cookbook for projects out there, but it's also something that I think makes a lot of sense to create different incentives and services to like white glove that. So, initially I reached out to Mark Glasgow, who's, very good at documentation and is ultimately, working with us to support that Ergo docs kind of manual and say, hey, if you wanted to take your time and navigate all of the politics and friction points and fees and whatever, is it possible for you to put that together as like some package if someone doesn't want to deal with this? And so he's currently scoping that out. So if any of the projects that integrate like one assistance, he's kind of the go-to guy. That's its own layer of complexity, unfortunately.
Right, and Rosen Bridge is doing well recently, right? So nice volume. Well, one day it was 350K a day, right?
Yeah, we actually,
USD. I mean,
I think
The
we
day
hit
after that was like 5 something too, right?
yeah, we did pretty well. It's still turning on, in my opinion. There's like from the different layers that we're working on, I would say we still have an element of like tech debt that we're sorting through, but it's really nice to see people, projects, slowly adopting it. I really do think that like the ability to unify multiple environments, which, in honesty, we don't even like, I would say once we get the second EVM, things get a lot more interesting because Cardano has its own friction points in terms of like stablecoin liquidity. Even though it's like top 10 chain, I think it's like top 40 or 50 in terms of stablecoin value. So, there's a bit of work to be done there to bootstrap kind of DeFi markets, which is underway. I'm sure that it's a little bit easier when, USDC or USDT seed funds you, right? But I think that's going to be interesting as we scale. So that's one thing that for me is a big goal, is try to create this unified trading environment on top of Rosen. And I think that will kind of open doors and really start to flex the capabilities of what it's built for.
all right. And so just today I've checked Monero actually, and it seems with Seraphis updates, it would be possible to have Rosen Bridge with Monero, right? So
that's been one of my long-term goals, is that how funny would it be to relist Monero across different environments? And then it's like, okay, well, that ultimately is going to put us in a position where, we need to make sure that our system is properly hardened, right? Because that naturally will maybe create some, positive noise, but I'm sure it's going to create some adversarial energies as well. So build for war. And, if we're going to build for war properly, we might as well bootstrap that and support a project like Monero. It's fun.
All right, nice. So, QX, what about you? Well, what's on your side?
Slow week, I guess. In the SIGs, we got our version 2 of Multisig together. We had some new members, so it took a little bit to get them on board with how to create the Multisig. I fell asleep last night and I was going to start a test transaction, so it looks like I'll start one after this meeting. Once we have that test transaction up, we'll put the rest of the treasury in there, and then we'll talk about how sturdy Padilla is and if we trust it enough to put in, tens of thousands of dollars into the Padilla treasury and get it out of, take it out of 7 people's hands and put it into everybody of the SIG's hands. So that'll be a cool experiment right there. I know Louis Vatra put 500,000, I think it was, of his own Padilla into that treasury, which, let me see what that is. That's about $2,000 worth of Padilla he threw into the SIG's treasury to show us that, there's some trust in the system that he built. So that's really cool. Right now we're working on kind of figuring out where information lies, right? We have Sigmanauts.com, but we also want to focus heavily on Padilla and having that be our kind of central hub, because if, let's say, Sigmanauts.com goes down, where's the information going to live, or that kind of thing. So, and it's also in control of a few people. So the idea is to bring a lot of that stuff to Padilla, whether it be voting on external links to bring in and put there, or else put all the information there for people to see under votes or discussions. We kind of want it there as well, I guess, per se. What else? I did some. Now that Padilla is out of beta, I think it's good timing too, because we're about to go into break with Cornell students here. I did my first kind of test last night on yesterday, on how we're going to integrate blockchain into payment systems here with one of our services. And I think you've heard me talk about it before. One of the services we do a shit ton of plotting, large format printing for students, for architecture, art, and planning students. So the idea, so thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, we want to distribute these kind of preliminary credit tokens to students, right? But they're so busy. How many of them are going to actually spin up a wallet, give us their wallet address, and accept those tokens, and then put Nautilus in their web browser and use a wallet connector on our portal for submissions, and then go that way? You get some because it's free, and they're getting a bunch of free plots for doing it. But I thought of a different way to do it. So I thought, let's introduce it to them completely kind of transparently, as well as, or I don't mean transparency, I mean like not hidden, but through TipperBot. So the idea is that they will go to the website to upload a plot. They'll choose the button that says pay by blockchain, and they hit submit. Their plot is uploaded, their file is uploaded, and then my system knows who they are because they logged into the plot center. So in a special payment channel in our Discord for AAP, because of course we run a Discord here too, it pops up a message that says, hey, so-and-so, your plot, this name, this size, this amount was submitted at this time. In order to pay for this plot and release it from the queue to be plotted, please copy this code block, paste it in, and send it. And the code block is just the /T, our Cornell account, Discord account, how many ever tokens, auto calculates that based on that. So they hit the copy block, they paste it, and they're paid. And then my system marks it as paid and unqueues it. So that's a good way, I think, to get students in without having initially to do a wallet or anything like that. They're just going to purely use TipperBot for that effort. Then on top of that, once they get more familiar with that, the next step is you saw that I created a beta Padilla. Now we have to create an actual Padilla off of that live production one and bring people in with wallets. So that's a gradual progression. I think that's going to have more adoption than having the kids go ahead and download a wallet immediately and go from there. So kind of like not they. On the front end, they don't know they're using a blockchain, right? They just know that they have an address and we've sent them some tokens and they can control and send from the TipperBot in there. So hopefully the slow education there is going to be more of a sturdy foundation when it's time to install wallets for other apps that we do on that. But the front end is all set up. Most of the back end too. We did some tests yesterday where we submitted a plot, it pinged us, and then we pasted the code in and it paid it. So it's close. We'll implement it during break and then incentivize students to come in and talk to TipperBot, and then we can blast them with some free block credits, and have them use the system. So that's exciting. We'll see how that goes.
Nice.
All right. Sounds good. So let's jump on the questions. So I have to in like 2 or 3 minutes. So any question to me specifically? Then,
let's see. Let's see if there's a question for you, Kushti. Joe, you see anything specifically for Kushti?
I don't even have the questions, so it's on you.
Okay, here we go. Kushti, this is for everybody, but I think you can answer this. This is from Easton. What type of applications are missing on Ergo that you'd like to see?
Oh, actually, I'm thinking about asking the community exactly the same question, right? So what's actually missed? So there are some popular types of applications, right? Still not here. For example, prediction markets, but they are coming, right? So I know about some of them. And then, what's needed? Then, we can have more stable coin designs always, right? Like liquidity routers and, all the heavy machinery. But I think for real world adoption, so what do we have now is, pretty much okay, right? Other tools will just come by demand. And then the question is, how to get to the real world adoption. And yeah, I think we need to think not about applications on blockchain, but yeah, about monetary innovations, right, for the real world. So how to use the tooling we have, so blockchains, peer-to-peer networks, applications on top of blockchain, peer-to-peer financial contracts and so on. So to build monetary systems which are useful. So magic internet money, but also useful for the real world. And then yeah, there is enough tooling maybe already, right? But more will come by demand. I'm pretty sure about.
I think when I think of that question, one thing comes to my mind immediately, and for to help out with people less experienced, I think it'd be amazing to have developers come in, and even though Ben hasn't worked on Mr. Stelfelger hasn't worked on Terminus in a while, it'd be amazing for people to jump in and use the Mosaic framework there, and put MuFi on the Mosaic framework, so you could do a DEX swap right inside of Terminus wallet, or you could post a physical right inside NFT wallet. Put SigmaFi right inside your Terminus with the Mosaic framework, so you could post and redeem loans, peer-to-peer bonds right there inside it. I think that's
that's also. So I think at this point maybe there is need for simplified UI, right, and the UX for both users and developers, actually, right? So simplified infrastructure, more decentralized, peer-to-peer oriented. Also, and then also education for users, because with the toolsets we have already, it seems most of users don't realize how powerful it is actually. So the risk needs maybe for more education at this point.
I think Joe, you guys are doing you're helping out with Nautilus framework, right? Oh, sorry, you gotta go, Kushti?
Yeah, so I have to run. So see you a bit later. Our the text chats and next.
Thanks for joining, Kushti. Glad you're there safely.
Yeah, have to run.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Joe, you your team that you're helping out with what was it? Was it Nautilus and Minotaur? One of them is moving to mobile in the Nautilus, moving to mobile in the future, and they have a framework as well, similar to that, where people can build into and create kind of sub-D apps inside that framework for the wallet.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Ergo this week about putting a sandbox on top of the node. That's something that I've wanted to see for a long time. And I think, honestly, for me, like what type of applications are missing on Ergo that I would like to see? I would say the first would be sidechain frameworks, right? And what that would do is, we've had this idea of Sigmachains. At some point, I'll have the bandwidth to pursue it. And that is where you take kind of the computational layer and all of the open source frameworks that we've built on top of Ergo and say, okay, let's call that the operating system, and plug that into different hardware inputs and kind of create this constellation of interconnected proof of work is fascinating to me, because then it's like, okay, well, you can absorb energy from CPUs, GPUs, ASICs. We could have multiple different algorithms that people are just essentially converting electricity into digital assets in some broad unified framework. So I guess it would be somewhat similar to like EVM compatibility for proof of work. Like that's always like, I don't know, my mind drifts there from time to time. If we're talking about applications that are missing on Ergo, what would I like to see? I would say that starting from like the node build, I'd like to see a sandbox with plugins, right? I think that would be a very powerful like command center long term.
What did Mutoshi say when you asked him about that?
He's a good character. We're just talking about, what's the friction, what's the time frame, what's the cost.
Yeah.
Trying to break it down into something that's digestible towards reality, and he's digging into that. He said, "Hey, I want to kind of get better estimation and kind of surveying before we proceed." And I respect that. That's the right way to do it.
For those watching that aren't familiar, Citergo is a very cool product. It's a desktop full node wallet that can either run a full node or you can link to somebody else's node. And it's got Ergo Pay in it as well. So you can, anything that has the Nautilus or the Ergo Pay button on the D app, you can connect to it right from Citergo right from your desktop. So it's a super easy, like one-click node setup, full wallet. It really can be easy. It's a fantastic tool.
Yeah, and I think that's a great foundation to start. I'm old enough to where I'm a desktop driver, right? I don't understand why people would want to put a bunch of money on their phone. I always lose my goddamn phone. So,
did you fix your screen, Joe? Is your screen still cracked?
Yeah, I ran over it with the car like a year ago and fixed it. Anyway. Yeah, probably that's the other, application environment that's missing. And it's interesting to say, okay, well, do we go would it be cool to pursue like an open source mobile wallet with that type of plugin and connector that is just a broad like command center for mobile? Or there's another interesting potential, which is where you get like PoW microclients, right? So you build a DApp specific like mobile app that then has its own PoW microclient built into it, so it's actually communicating to the P2P layer. That would be pretty damn cool too. In the right environment, maybe that type of light client, like micro client that's talking to the P2P layer would be simpler, I guess, because when you get a wallet and then you get multiple plugins to a wallet, pretty soon you just get a lot of complexity on like the UX side, right? So I don't know. I'm probably never going to be like a big mobile guy. That's just honest. So that's probably better left to people that are willing to put money on their phone and don't lose it, right?
Yeah, but it'd be beyond the US though, and other developed countries. That's usually people's only touch point of the internet. Yeah.
It's huge. It's just one of those things where it's like that's where I operate from, and I don't assume that's going to change. So, like if you're talking about like what's the best mobile, UI UX, I'm probably the wrong guy because I'll never use it. Like that's just honest. But that's becoming more popular. And I guess I don't know, it's just easier not to lose my desktop, right?
Maybe, but you suffer from a brick attack at that point, right? A brick through your back window when somebody takes it.
Brick attack or something, but at least I'm not going to put it down somewhere and then walk away, right?
Your dog will take care of that, though, right?
Exactly.
All right, we got a question for you, Joe. Question for Armeanio. Will Rosen permits, this is from Cotelier, our comic god. Will Rosen permits price reduce? Also, are any plans on allowing a minimum amount of permits per watcher?
Yeah, we have a lot of ancillary work to do around Rosen Bridge, to be honest. So we actually started this process looking at this idea of having like modular points of adaptability, because it's like if you can adjust like the economic assumptions across a group of mechanics, you can kind of tailor the system. You have some like adjustment controls, right? And that's actually pretty complex in Rosen, because we tried to say, okay, well, if we're going to make this sustainable long term, we need that type of flexibility so like the supply side can adapt, right? And that's its own layer of complexity, because it's like you take something like Bitcoin, okay? Everybody, it hit 100K. It's great. Congratulations to everybody that participates. I still have some serious questions about the like economic security long term, right? And in a way, Bitcoin is like the original meme coin, because it said, okay, we're going to be, like, I don't know, secured by math and math-based emission, but that is like setting, I don't know, it's setting like an economic course into the future with no ability to adapt, even though, everything around it is adapting, which is a part of its sexiness in many, cases. People say, okay, well, it's stable, but then it's also like, what, I don't know. I don't know of really any commodity that doesn't have the ability to adjust on the supply side. And if we're going to call Bitcoin a digital commodity, it has some weird, it's like saying this is going to be the price of oil forever, right? And this is going to be how much we're going to emit forever, or gold, or whatever. And that's kind of weird, because it's true, you have like the difficulty adjustment and you have like some supply side game being played, but long term, that's going to be a big question in terms of like the feasibility of network hash rate, and how it deals with both lost coins and value from the system, as well as decreasing emissions. And I don't know, give it 2 or 3 cycles, I think it's going to be a lot more popular to talk about. So at this point, people will be grumpy, but I'll talk to them in 8 years, I guess.
The thing that drives me crazy, Joe, is with at least Bitcoin, when comparing it to Ergo, is that, I just saw a tweet from, Michael Saylor this morning. He said that when he dies, he's going to burn his Bitcoin keys, so that as a present to everybody. So it's because I'm like, what the fuck? Like, is that a feature?
Let's first get to 2029, where he has to start dealing with convertible debt and all of that fun stuff, right? And, I assume at this point he's going to live, I wish him a long and healthy life, well past like the notes that he's emitting from his company. So let's see how that plays out first, right? I have no idea, but I have some serious concerns about that, just because there's some like supply side dynamics in terms of the difficulty adjustment. But I don't know, if I look at like Ergo itself, it has a lot more supply side levers miners can play with in terms of fees and block size. And so getting back to the original question, there are actually a lot of like modularly adjustable points in Rosen that we have not even started to really optimize. At this point, we said, hey, we need to get this framework together. We need to get it off the ground. Let's launch like a meme coin and just focus on building. And we've been doing that for almost, a year, basically, at least since we went quote unquote live, and then, not to count all the time before that. And we really haven't done much with the token other than, put it out there. That's, and there's are a lot of different mechanisms we can use to create economic incentives and adjust pricing for like the producers of security, which is the watchers. So yeah, like, does a minimum amount of permits per watcher make sense long term? It does. That way, if you have let's say people with more watchers, it prevents the congestion. Can permits price be reduced? It can. That's something that's built into the system. And it's also a question of saying, okay, well, should we adjust the collateral and make the collateral threshold a bigger pain point, or should we make the permits a bigger pain point? And like, for me, I tend to think, okay, well, generally the collective group of watchers is going to be smarter than me. It's just the truth. There's more of them. It's mind share, right? And so I think setting the incentives to where they get the majority of like the fee value moving through Rosen puts them in a nice position to form an element of governance. And that's the shitty side of having adjustable parameters, is like, then you get into this idea of, okay, well, who's going to govern the parameters and how is consensus going to be formed? Which is always its own pain. Like, governance is hard, and that's why, like, I always prefer immutability, because then I don't have to deal with that. But here we are. And so, like, long term, I do think that one of the best tools I've seen in the crypto space for governance is PoW, right? So I think that naturally we're in the same environment as PoW. We have this wonderful tool. We need to start at some point, bootstrapping governance mechanisms on PoW. Now, what is that going to look like, and how do we make that fair? Those are, political questions that I'm not a very good politician, but we'll solve collectively, right? But do I think that type of adjustment should happen and there should be systems in place to lead that? Absolutely. That's why we built Rosen the way that we did. Now, like, for the core team, right now we're working on testnet, the peer-to-peer layer, adding new chains, adding trade bots on top. So it hasn't been a priority, like which maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I think a lot of, like, projects in the crypto space focus a lot more on, like, their token and markets, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea what Rosen's even trading for, to be honest, because if I deliver, like, value, then the rest will figure itself out. That's how I've always kind of looked at it. So yeah, there's a lot of big discussions and fights to be had, and I look forward to that. I do think that, like, the watcher community ultimately is going to be the larger, republic or whatever form of governments it takes around Rosen itself. And I think that being that they also have, like, a incentive alignment for that, I hope that in time they also become a marketing element of Rosen, because that ultimately is, like, their business. So let's see. I've been kind of watching the discussions take place, and I'm happy that they're taking place because my focus hasn't been there.
Yeah, speaking of, when you were talking about Padilla, I'd still like to see some sort of Git controlled, smart contract controlled Git, so that people can push changes to a Git repository and then can be voted on at Padilla, and then the action actually, publishes the
yeah. I've thought about
fully
that.
out of, like a multisig kind of thing.
Yeah, I've thought about that, just because it's kind of the basis of Rosen, is this idea of threshold signatures. And it's like, is that some interesting side case that exists, where it's like, okay, you have multiple parties that are controlling a single account in a centralized entity. Like, is there a way that we can use, like, threshold, capacities to create this, like, on-chain, sign in or update or whatever command? I don't know. It's side thought. It comes and goes.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing that is interesting, just as a general purpose tool that doesn't really exist. I wouldn't have been able to delete the Twitter if that existed, right?
It has been 30 days since the last Twitter mention, Joe. Reset to 0.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's see. Dom F says, can Chainlink style protocol be built on Ergo but using Oracle pools?
Well, Chainlink is a bit centralized in terms of like the core of it. The Ergo Oracle pools are open source. We can build some pretty complex frameworks. Like
Yeah.
long term, I've always said, okay, well, I think that the most interesting outcome for Oracle pools long term is a Hydra-like implementation that we've seen on Cardano, which, we're extended UTXO, so it translates well. Is this ability to have, like, it's federated, okay? You have multiple Oracle pool operators. If they were running their own off-chain environment, the ability to process data off-chain and then just kind of submit, footprints on-chain would be fascinating, because you could run a ton of different endpoints simultaneously and get a super complex feed of data points that you could play with on chain. So long term, I like, for me personally, I think that since it's federated anyway, having it in that environment and having like just a massive data set being periodically posted on chain would be the coolest long term outcome. But then you get to the question, like, what good is it right now? And then that's a lot of technical complexity, but I don't know. I think that's, like, in my own brain, the most interesting outcome for Oracle pools. It's something that, we want to kind of play with as well with Rosen at some point, but there's, a lot of ideas stacking up. So we gotta dig through what we need to dig through first.
All right, let's see what else we have here. Luke Graysmith wants to know, is Chain Cash or Let's System best implemented as a side chain?
I tend to think it's better in the layer 2 just because of fees. I guess you could create a side chain that has, lower fee environment. You could, it's interesting. I don't know. It's like, okay, well, do you want that to be, proof of stake, proof of work, or some, roll up, or I don't know. There's a lot of different places you could put it. I think ultimately for a Let's to be effective, the most important thing to consider is fees. For chain cash, that can be a different animal because you might want different security assumptions depending on what you're putting on the notes. So there's also like this notion of like, how value is like abstracted and then secured. So like in a Let's, if it's a community framework, if I'm just going to be like, hey, QX and I are going to have QX bucks, and, I'll help him out here and he'll help me out there, and we'll use some mechanism to like balance the give and take. You want low fees, right? Because the value you're securing is a little bit different than, let's say, chain cash, where it's like, I'm going to take my company or a commodity and, secure its value in a note that then becomes tradable. So that's a really broad question. It's a good question, and I honestly don't know the answer, but I don't think that a single answer is going to apply. I think we can say, like some base principles to kind of build on, but I don't know. People smarter than me need to build it.
All right, let's see. We've got a question from Wanaronjoy. How could Rosen benefit from Subblocks? Yeah, we just get a question a bit off and on, right?
Yeah.
With speedier blocks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, what proof of work is
finality. It's when you feel good about finality.
When you feel good about finality, and so I think that even though it's not popular for the base framework of Rosen itself, we need to be conservative in terms of finality. Now, it's interesting. We hear a lot that like, hey, Rosen is a bit slow, and to some degree that's true. But if you look at other bridges in the space, an example, you have some bridges in Ethereum where you can move from L1 to L2 pretty quickly, right? But the ability to get back to L1 might take a week of a lockup period. And then it's like, okay, well, you have all of these ZK schemes around, which different animals, different libraries, sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly why someone went with one and not the other. But usually there's some proving period where it's like you have a you're optimistic. So then if there's a problem, you have some, ability to dispute the optimistic assumption of the bridge itself. And, sometimes that might take a day, right? So what does settlement look like in different bridges, and it is different. It's not always as fast as people necessarily think. And then the question is like, what is the proof and what does it represent? And, kind of how did you get there? How strong is it? There's a lot of different trade-offs in the space. I think that personally, the best way to optimize transaction speed of Rosen is we've kind of discussed this lightly, and it's again something that it's like, hey, it's out there, we can do this, but then it's time, energy, and resources, right? Is this idea of Rosen fast. And essentially what that would be is a DeFi framework where people would provide liquidity and have this ability to say, okay, we're going to have lighter assumptions, right? So it's like if you kind of see money heading through the Rosen Bridge and you say, okay, well, this is secure enough that I'm going to front the money to the person that wants the funds, and they're going to pay an extra fee, and me as a liquidity provider is essentially going to, get the incentive of that fee. We could make it faster, right? It's this idea of like pre-confirmation settlement, where you have somebody that steps in as a liquidity provider to make that faster, and they take on some, less secure assumptions. But then the question is, how secure is secure, right?
You're gonna pay for you're gonna pay for that too, though. Of course.
Yeah, you got to pay for that, but that already exists in most systems, right? You do like a bank transfer, and they say, okay, well, if you want it in the standard 3 to 7 days, we're gonna charge you this, and if you want it in 24 hours, that's gonna cost you. That's gonna cost you. Well, that's a part of why is because you have somebody that is essentially acting as a liquidity provider, and you're settling faster, and then they're trusting the system will pay them later. So I think that the main benefit of Subblocks is going to be like for the end user, probably just the UX improvements.
Yeah, 100%.
Where you get to see things faster, and then it makes you feel better.
Yeah, I mean, even on any chain, I hear from anybody, the pain point is, why am I waiting 20 blocks on gate? Why am I waiting 30 blocks on here? That kind of thing. It's all up to when that central exchange feels like that money is actually
that's an adjustable parameter, and usually in the exchange application form, there's a section specific to that. What's your longest roll? What's your longest rollback? Which some chains have that. How many blocks until you have like weak security assumptions in your opinion, medium security assumptions, strong security assumptions. And then being that we're GPU mineable proof of work, it's, working secured by chaos. But proof of work is, as it's pretty chaotic, and there's, I don't think there's any form of proof of work more chaotic than GPU proof of work, just because, at this point, there's not really a dominant chain, right? So interesting. I guess CPU kind of has its own botnet problems and stuff, but that's a little bit different than some other consensus mechanisms. Are maybe a little cleaner because they're federated, right?
Yep. All right, we got give a ELI 5 for Argo the Argonian. Want to know, what does Lithos do?
It gives power back to miners. All right, so there actually something really unique happened on the Bitcoin blockchain. I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, and that was there was a solo miner that was running his own infrastructure, and built his own block, meaning ordered the transactions, submitted it to the, Bitcoin network, and it was valid. So that one block was totally local. And that actually hadn't happened on the Bitcoin network for like 12 years. Okay, so what happens is when all of your hash rates go to a pool, essentially that pool is building and proposing the block. So then it's like, how many block producers do you have? And, usually that's in essence skewed to how many pools are dominating your hash rate, right? So you can say, okay, well, in something like Ergo, we may only have 2 or 3 dominant block producers. That's problematic, right? Because if one of them decided to say, hey, we're going to, censor transactions, we're going to be OFAC compliant, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, it's true miners would move, right? Hopefully. But miners are not always that responsive, to be totally honest with you, and they're not always very responsible in terms of, anything beyond their own incentive. And so one unique thing that Lethos does is it allows miners to build their own blocks in a pooled form, and it creates extra incentives for them through using DeFi, which is pretty fascinating. So it is a problem in proof of work. And, you'll often get this question, what is more decentralized, proof of work or proof of stake? Well, I think a good parameter to preface that by is always going to be how many dominant block producers do you have, right? And you can say, okay, well, if you can pool hash rate and individual miners can build and submit blocks, you now have to count that chunk of hash rate as individual miners. So it really changes the assumption of proof of work itself in terms of how it's currently looked at. And I would say, if successful and adopted, it will make a proof of work more decentralized in terms of independent block production than any network that we've seen. It will essentially go back to what Ergo was like when it was all solo miners, as they were locally producing.
I was going to say, the first version of Autolycos. Yeah.
So, life is a circle, and we're trying to go back to the assumptions that Ergo started from with different tooling.
Very interesting. Let's see. We got a question from X, I think, from Twitter.
I'm on Twitter, huh?
Yeah, Twitter, it's coming through. This is Mining Crusade as a username. Wouldn't they're saying, I think this was back when we were discussing your liquidity with Hummingbots and those kind of things, or with Rosen. They're saying, wouldn't it be beneficial to have a tier 1 exchange, volume, better erg price, funds for developers? Yeah,
it would be great to have tier 1 exchanges supporting proof of work, but they're not, right? And that's problematic. And then the question is, why are they not supporting proof of work? And it's like, well, on one side, you have projects that essentially can pre-mine or mint a bunch of tokens and grease the wheels everywhere, which really helps, with market adoption. But it also creates this very weird situation where if an exchange is getting Genesis funds and they're producing blocks, they have dominance in that network that is only going to scale up unless they choose otherwise, right?
Yep.
Like the funniest thing about the Ethereum, migration away from proof of work is, where did all those subsidies go? Well, a lot of exchanges are, essentially running infrastructure. They're now block producers. Right. So now miners are still using them, which is insane. But we haven't seen much support from tier 1 exchanges with proof of work assets, because proof of work assets are fair. Right.
We go to Binance. We go to Binance and they're like, we want 30% of your supply. And we're like, okay, go to the fucking market and buy it, because that's the only place you're going to be able to get it.
The last time I was asked for an OC or over-the-counter deal for ERG was this morning. And I always say, well, we launched way back when Ergo was even in testnet phase with a specific roadmap that we still have not wrapped up. Subblock, if you go back to like the initial testnet, documents and what is our plan with Ergo, we were talking about different scaling solutions like Bitcoin NG, which is Subblocks, right? So you have a project here that's been building for 7 or 8 years, pursuing a technical roadmap. And I guess in the meantime, you have somebody that, got famous for, their Hawk Tui stuff that rugs $1 million.
Oh, Jesus.
Like 20 minutes. Like, come on, this space is getting a little retarded in terms of like technical delivery and where people's focus is. But the tier 1 exchanges are supporting that type of, attention-based assets, right? They're supporting a lot of, VC projects that give them, block production capacity. Proof of work is unique because if an exchange wants to produce blocks, they need to mine, right? There's a different power dynamic at play. So it's not as sexy for them because, they don't have as much power. They don't have as much power over liquidity. They don't have as much power over block production. And I've talked to some large exchanges that are like, hey, right now our main focus is seed investing in, projects that are pre-token generation event where they're trying to essentially, bootstrap an asset and then sell it. And that's a tremendous position of power to be in. Proof of work is interesting because it's chaos, right? And if you want to have block production capacity, you have to throw energy into the chaos, which requires its own time, energy, investment, maintenance. That is a very different assumption than a lot of other systems. So I would love to see tier 1 exchanges support proof of work, but honestly, they're making a joke of themselves, in my opinion.
I mean, I saw Brian Armstrong's tweet this morning about, Bitcoin reaching 100K and his thread there. And I felt I was so close to responding like, bro, you list fucking dog tokens all day with hats and cat tokens. Like, give me a fucking break.
The market formed around Bitcoin and initial miners. Like that's just the truth. Most exchanges, if you look at early exchanges, they were all started by miners, right? And it's very interesting to look at how the mindset, mentality, and dynamics of mining have changed from like the Bitcoin miners were a lot more, I don't know, let's say initially a lot more ideologically driven and a lot more, I would say, generally badass than the people that just shill ASIC codes and, it's the same nonsense. Like they don't really push for like decentralization or have long-term goal with digital assets. It's revenue. It's a revenue, but it doesn't really work because then you don't really build value. Yeah. Which it is what it is. I think it came from this period where Ethereum mining was profitable for, a pretty long clip because it has dominance, right? And it had, amazing growth. So a lot of miners did really, really well. And then they developed this mentality that they should always do, really, really well. But then it kind of led to this whole, Vitalik is your daddy and controls everything. And then they got rugged. So maybe they should take a little bit more power in terms of what they want to build. Because if you look at what the Bitcoin miners were able to create, it's pretty damn awesome to see. It's probably unpopular.
Let's see. You got time, Joe? Or I think we got one more.
I got a little bit more time.
Okay, let's see. Let's mention this. This is from Ursa Miner 2010, talking about the SIGs mining project that was just funded by the EF. I think it was like 24 grand, right? That was put over to this proposal. It's pretty neat. Sorry, go for it, Joe. I
was going to say that my single biggest regret since let's say, working in and around Ergo is actually trying to be, well, I was more in the EF and I had to kind of talk with different mining pools and help them with node updates and stuff. So I said, okay, well, based on that position, I should try to be probably neutral. When GitBlock was around, and I regret that because GitBlock was an amazing project that I think was probably before its time even. So now that there's a SIGs mining project, I'm 100% going to be like, hey, if you're going to mine Ergo, mine to the SIGs mining project because they're doing something, right? They're actually contributing to the network. They're adding, value beyond just hosting infrastructure, right? And I think that mining pools, in a way, are a big part of why proof of work, is not. I don't know that, like, collectively they have a ton of leverage. They can say, okay, well, we have these Bitcoin fees. If you want access to our liquidity, support proof of work. If they did that, they have power to leverage exchanges, but they have no balls. And that would take creating conflict with existing partners, but that is like the single group of entities that could more or less force the broader adoption of proof of work in exchanges, but they won't do that. Well, they haven't yet, so I can assume that pattern won't change until something else changes. Mine to the SIGs project because they're actually doing stuff. They're actually trying to create value, expand capacity for proof of work, give you unique tooling. They're in the ecosystem. They're building, and I respect that. I should have been stronger with promoting GitBlock, but based on trying to kind of manage things across mining pools, I was like, well, if I'm going to be like an emissary, I should be more neutral, which I regret. I was too nice. It's not nice to be too nice.
I look at something that might surprise a lot of people about mining pools. If you compare them to Cardano stake pools, you can see the communities that can form around stake pools in Cardano, right? You get these personas leading the stake pool. You get people involved in the stake pool, and stake pools require almost zero effort on the stakers, right? You simply just type in an address and you stake your Cardano, your ADA to that stake pool. That's it. But yet the community still build. So when we started the Sigmanauts mining DAO, and from my time at GitBlock, mining to the GitBlock pools, it's very apparent that people who have skin in the game, like you literally have a mining farm in your basement or in a storage shed or somewhere, like you have a lot of skin in the game, that makes these connections in these organizations and these pools socially much more, I don't know, much deeper.
I have to agree. I have to agree. The best groups that I've ever been in like my time in the crypto space have been mining groups. Developer groups are also pretty great too, but there's a little bit less skin in the game in terms of like, hey, something went wrong. Hey, how do I optimize this? Hey, what's going on? Like the help support.
They're so apt to share. Yeah. Like here's my config for Hummingbird. Yeah. For
mining
Hivos.
Is badass in that sense. I don't think there's a single group that is on par.
I agree. So that's the idea here. The idea of this project is to, forward what the Sigmanauts mining DAO has always been, and that's community adoption and education. So that's mainly showing miners that, look, you have all these, as Joe was talking about earlier, you have all these buttons and knobs you can twist on the Ergo chain for configs to benefit you, to benefit the chain, to benefit everybody, to fine tune. So that's one of the things. The other is there's some ideas of barrier of entries as well. Like not everybody wants to know Sigma Rust or even wants to know Fleet SDK, right? So people in college, coming out of college, maybe took a couple Python courses, right? So that's easy and accessible to them. So what would be better than making a tool set with some Python bindings to Sigma Rust to be able to have those people come in and if they're running their own mining pool, tweak things and make tooling for their pool themselves or their own thing. A cool thing that I saw on Twitter the other day was it made me like, I don't know. It made me think, wow, yeah, that's exactly what miners do. They're social and they group and they help each other, but they're also very independent. Somebody said, Son of the Tech was posting about Ergo, and he said, I'm going to have to throw my cards that I bought specifically kind of for this. And someone said, mine to the SIGs pool. And he said, I'll mine myself. And I love that attitude. That's fantastic. He's got the capacity to spin up his own stratum and mine by himself. That's fucking awesome. So these kind of toolings, yeah, exactly. So part of this project as well is develop tooling, kind of click and go tooling for people to be able to do that. Like imagine having a package that you download on your computer and you hit go and it does a node for you, it does mining core for you, and sets up a local front end for you to see all your dash stats. And you could just go from there. And then if you want other people to help you out, you open your port in your router and other people come to you and mine to your pool kind of thing. So that is a really cool part of this as well. And then the other part of it is keeping it, DAO based. So all these decisions, all the money goes into the DAO. All the decisions are going to be made by the DAO moving forward, in the general sense of things. So, yeah, I think it's a unique thing that uses Padilla, uses tooling in the Ergo ecosystem, and brings. Honestly, I'll say it makes mining great again, Joe.
It's needed. GPU mining got absolutely nuked when Ethereum left, which, okay, given the, I don't know, I personally, I think historically that is the dumbest decision they've ever made, because they had absolute market dominance. You have all of this hardware infrastructure that's coming around, let's say, AI learning machines, etc., that are GPU based, and proof of work functions best when there's excess capacity, right? Whether it's excess energy, and it helps recycle excess capacity. That's, where proof of work is the most profitable. So at some point, given, the rate of growth and like hardware expansion right now, there's going to be a lot of waste and, older hardware out there that is going to look for a second life. And I think that in a way, GPU mining is positioned really, 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 really well long term, to both, harness that excess capacity, but then it's a matter of understanding that these like data centers are extremely energy hungry. So there's already a natural incentive to find the lowest energy input cost, because that's, fundamentally just a part of the business. So then you're going to have areas that, have excess old hardware and cheap energy costs. I think that's going to lead to some interesting things long-term for proof of work. But, the markets take time to consolidate, right? That I don't know. It's like firing 90% of the workforce and sending them home. It doesn't really, get replaced instantly. But, I don't want GPU proof of work to be the Rust Belt of crypto, right? And there for a bit, it kind of was the Rust Belt of crypto, because the major value generation just up and left. Yeah. So it's on us to rebuild.
All right. I think that's a good place to end it, Joe. We're gone. We went 20 minutes over. Got to save some for next week too. It was awesome that you joined us today, Joe. I think you made a lot of people happy seeing your face after.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Got my coffee. Brutal.
No way. You did pretty well for forgetting your coffee, Joe.
It's upstairs on the counter.
What time is it? It's 8:20 there. You got time. It's still morning. You can have 2 cups of coffee still.
Yeah, I have to rewarm it or something. Anyway, thanks for joining, everybody. I hope I answered your questions. If not, I tried.
Ciao, everybody. See you next week.